that is the name of the building, comes from Arabic, and it means a dry well. The building, since its beginning, was a prison. For a period, it was an ecclesiastical prison due to the proximity with the main cathedral, but it was also a female prison. And why we are here? We are here because this was a prison when, during the new state regime that existed in Portugal from 1926 to 1975, this was a place where the political prisoners were brought, and people were tortured here. So that's the main reason, and it's a place of memory to remember this situation here in Portugal. So why Portugal had a situation between 1926 and 1974 in which people were tortured? It was because in 1910 there was a revolution in Portugal that abolished the monarchy. So Portugal was one of the first countries in Europe to abolish monarchy. And after the abolition of monarchy, Portugal lived in a situation of political instability. For you to have an idea, between 1910 and 1926, in this period, only one president was able to fulfill his mandate. The other presidents were never able to fulfill the mandate for which they were elected. Sometimes we had governments of 3 months and so on. So a huge political instability and also rivalry and persecutions among the political parties. So in 1926, a group of militaries decided to make a coup here in Portugal, a coup d'etat. And that coup d'etat resulted in a military dictatorship. And in this military dictatorship, a minister of finances, Antonio Oliveira Salazar, he stabilized the Portuguese economy because the Portuguese economy was in a very bad situation. So because of that, he was able to gain an upper hand in the government. So with that upper hand, he became the prime minister. And we had a president, but the president was more or less a symbolic figure. The power was in the prime minister. And he ruled Portugal until 1968, when he suffered a health issue problem, a stroke. And then from 1968 until 1974, we have another person that was his successor, his Delphine, his protege, that ruled Portugal until 1974, when another military coup ended the dictatorship. So Portugal lived during 48 years in a dictatorship. And we need to put this in the context of what happened in Europe in the same time, because if in the 20s and 30s, other countries in Europe like Spain, Italy, or Germany was also under dictatorship, in the case of Italy and in the case of Germany, the situation changed after the Second World War and they became democracies. But for instance, Portugal and Spain, no. Portugal and Spain and also Greece were the last dictatorships here in Europe. And this dictatorship in Portugal changed during this period of 48 years, and there are some historians that consider that in the beginning, in the end of the late 20s, in the beginning of the 30s, this dictatorship was here in Portugal was more or less like a fascist regime, like that existed in Italy, for instance, but there is debate in historiography about that situation. But what is certain is that this was a repressive regime. People did not have political rights. They did not have political rights, and especially, for instance, women did not have civilian rights. Women could not vote. Women could not be the head of its family. They could not open a bank account. They could not travel without permission of the husband of some a male person or partner, a male person of their family. A divorce was not possible. So a situation in which there was repression, political repression. There was only one political party, which was the political party of Salazar, União Nacional. Other political parties were not recognized, especially they were not allowed to exist. In 1921, there was founded the Portuguese Communist Party, but that Portuguese Communist Party had to live in clandestinity. Underground. No.
Wasn't like
No. And its mission to collect records, and also to do interviews, to collect oral testimonies of people that were involved in the struggle against the dictatorship here in Portugal and against the colonial wars. So they decided to do this exhibition to mark the 50th anniversary of the independence of the Portuguese colony. So the information that you see here belongs to their
So those were, I don't know if I should say that, immigrants, people that came from those colonies and stayed in Portugal, and then they were just against the regime and what was going on, and the interviews there, they're talking about how repressed or they felt like discriminated, etc. Is that right? Or not?
The leaders, some of the leaders of the liberation studied here in Portugal. Is the case of Amílcar Cabral there, or Eduardo Molano. They studied here in Portugal and then they left Portugal and they started the colonial wars. And this information that you have here, they were donated by Portuguese that supported those liberation movements. So they collected this information, they kept it, and then they donated. And there you are seeing it was one of the formal freedom fighters.
Portugal had many colonies, including many colonies such as
Não há nada assim muito especial que teria passado durante a minha infância, teria passado durante a minha existência e não interessa diferenciar significativamente aquilo que ia tornar mas há um dado aqui que as fontes de
As ditaduras de Salazar e Franco, Portugal. O campo de concentração do Tarrafal, aberto em 1900 em Portugal, foi uma ditadura de quase meio século que desagua na guerra colonial no 33, na imigração maciça e num crescente da ocupação. 48 anos do regime fascista chegaram ao fim graças à luta e à tenacidade do povo português.
The international amnesty international was created because of the political repression in Portugal. It was a British person that read in the newspaper that two people were imprisoned here in Portugal because they made a toast to freedom, and because of that, that British person created the international amnesty. So it was strictly connected with the situation of repression here.
Memória
Can you see how
presente.
poor Portugal was?
A Primeira Guerra Mundial provocou 9 milhões de mortos e 30 milhões de
We
feridos.
can have yet
Civis
some
e militares.
information
A Europa
about how
entrou em convulsão.
and so
Na
on.
margem da guerra desapareceram 4 impérios e a Revolução Russa de
This video gives you
1917
some
abriu
information
novos
about
caminhos.
the background in Europe and in Portugal from
Face
the
à
First
ascensão
World
dos
War
movimentos
I
populares,
to the
os
end
regimes
of the
liberais
century.
escolheram a repressão.
And this session is dedicated to the printing. Why? Because because some of the opposition to the Estado Novo regime, and it was this opposition that was subjected to repression here in this building, some of this opposition expressed through printing, through journals and so on. So you have here some information regarding the new state regime. Okay? And you can see here well-known Portuguese newspapers. For instance, Diário de Notícias, it was well-known, and o Século. República, another well-known. So, the printing, although most of people did not know how to read, the printing was very important in this period of the Portuguese history. And here you can find António de Oliveira Salazar, that was the dictator in Portugal until 1968 when he had a stroke. And you can see here they are doing the Nazi salute. And that is one of the reasons why many of historians say that in the beginning, in the 20s and 30s, the Portuguese style regime was a fascist regime. And they had also an organization like the SS, people with the black shirts. They had also an organization similar to the SS. There you have the Portuguese participation in the First World War. The First World War started in 1913, but Portugal only joined the war in 1916. And even today, we are not sure why Portugal, that was a very important, joined the war. But according to some historians, the main reason was to defend the colonies, because Germany was threatening Portuguese colonies in Africa, namely Mozambique and Angola, which had frontiers with South Africa and Namibia. That was one main reason. But the Portuguese soldiers were not well prepared, and they were massacred by the Germans in Verdun, where the Germans used gas against the Portuguese militants. Yes, it was a huge defeat for the Portuguese militants. But they were not well prepared. And as you can see, they were very small people. They were they were not well nourished. They were very, very small.
Sorry. Got the whole view.
Manifestando-se nas ruas pela democracia e pela liberdade. My neighbor said this and that, or my colleague at work reads clandestine newspapers and so on. So, in the police would go
go to that person, take that person to the headquarters of the police, which was nearby, and there they usually torture people. Yes, and people was judged. They went to courts, and the court was an arbitrary system. So they could give you a sentence of 2 years, okay? And then, for instance, you came here, and you would be here for the entire period of your sentence, where you would be subject to torture also here. And then after these 2 years, imagine the police thinks, oh, you are not already rehabilitated. They would imprison you again, for instance, for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, as long as they wish. As long as they wish. So you would start a sentence, but you would never know when you would finish the sentence, because it was a very arbitrary sentence. And the torture was, for instance, they beaten people. They used to beaten people, but also there was something that they call the sleep deprivation. That was very harsh torture. So people, they did not allow people to sleep for a certain amount of time, and you can imagine what that can provoke in somebody's mind. And also there was another form of torture in which you need to stand for a long period of time without moving, and they usually also took people clothing, people were naked, and so on. So different forms of humiliation besides the beating. And here, these are the files where they had information about people. So imagine that somebody says that you were reading clandestine newspaper. They would open a file about you with information about your name, your age, your address, your relatives, pictures of you, information that they would collect near of your boss, and so on. And they would in the course of the years always to update your file. So this is the files. Okay, you have here information. Okay, and you can see here the names. This is from Angola. Okay. Very good, and you can see here the prisoners. Some information about the prisoners. And you can see here the exchange information and so on. Here, somebody could send a flyer. That's a poster that somebody work. Here you have the files from the courts, okay? So the repressive system, which was not only the police, but also the courts here in Portugal, the judiciary system, okay? And common people, they also used to use the police, for instance, to make denunciations, to say bad things about somebody they did not like. It is a little bit about everything, about a little bit of this here. Let's close, but this is how. So it was a military tribunal and so on, okay?
During the Second War, and I don't know if it's correct, but I heard that the Portuguese were like neutral. Yeah, so and there were like lots of spies.
Yes.
Because it was a neutral. They didn't go to Germany or to England. Yes. So tell us, if you can tell us a little bit about this.
That's a good question, because as I said, in the First World War, Portugal went to war with Britain, so against Germany. But in the Second World War, Portugal decided not to go to war. and it declared neutrality. But it was a very special neutrality because during most of the war, Portugal maintained a very good relationship with Germany, with the Nazi Germany. But when the course of the war started to change, Portugal realized that the Allies would win, and they did the opposite. They changed, and they gave the islands in the Azores to the United States, for the United States to use. It doesn't matter because the planes could not cross the Atlantic alone. They need to stop and to refuel. So Azores was very important because of that. So they gave Azores to the United States in the last period of the war, and because of that, Portugal, the Estado Novo regime, was able to survive the war, and the Allies did not pressure Portugal to change the regime. But there was a group in Portugal that believed that with the end of the Second World War, Portugal would become a democracy and free. And so they tried to pressure the Portuguese government here in the sense of opening the regime to democracy. And they created the movement Unidade Democrática. But this movement was repressed by the Estado Novo regime, and in the end nothing changed. Nothing changed. Why? Because Azores was very important for the Allies in the context of the Cold War. And Portugal in 1951 made an agreement with the United States to allow the United States to create a base in Azores. In 1949, Portugal became one of the founding members of NATO, which was a paradox because Portugal was not a democracy. But in the end, it became one of the founding members of NATO, which had democracy as one of its main goals. Yeah. But it was due to the importance of the Azores base, and also because the Estado Novo regime was very good in playing with the idea of the communist threat here in Portugal. So that's the reason why the other powers, United Kingdom, France, and so on, they closed eyes to the reality here in Portugal. Yes, yes. But between 1926 and 1975, there were several attempts here by different groups to change the situation here, to overthrow the Estado Novo regime. In 1961 was very important because there was a military, Botelho Muniz, that tried to give a coup in Portugal, but he failed. And another attempt was that Santa Liberdade, that was a cruise ship that a group of militaries from Portugal took, and they tried to take this ship to Angola and to start a revolution there, but they also failed. During the 48 years in which the regime exists, there were several attempts to overthrow the regime, and these attempts usually was repressed by the Estado Novo regime, yes. And people were killed in that process. About the living conditions in Portugal. You can see there. Portugal is still not a highly industrialized country, okay? In the period what existed agriculture, you can see wine there, rice here, fishermen there, some clothing industry, and in the other side of the river, some chemical industry, shipping, construction, and so on. So it was mainly a rural country. Also, people live from agriculture.
And how to escape from this building.
But you know, when you are under pressure and you are being tortured, you are
You think about how
yes,
this can
yes.
be. Yeah.
It's a nice setting, yes.
1997, yeah.
I mean, here in Guinea, it's well known the prison of Ilha das Galinhas. Master thesis about one of these prisons in the south of Angola. So you have it here. He discovered that one of these prisons had something that they call the water. What's the cell in English? Cell prison.
Cell is the prison. Yeah. No, the prison where
The
you
jail,
stay,
the room,
jail,
the room where you are in the prison, your room in the jail. A cell. So water cell. So he discovered that that prison had a water cell. What was that water cell? Was something that they excavated in the ground with a tunnel that connect that space that they excavated with the river. So what they did, they put a person on the ground, they opened the tunnel, and the water inundated the space, and the people would drown inside, and then the river would remove, the water would remove the body to the canal, to the river. Yes. So a water cell, they call it a water cell.
Awful.
Yes.
Just awful. Just awful.
You can see how resourceful they were in terms of how to keep people. How to keep people.
It's heavy.
No, it is.
It's very
heavy. I think it's important to have knowledge about this, to preserve the memory of those that fought for freedom here in Portugal and for independence in the colonies.
Yeah.
I think really important.
And I think it's for you that I'm so sorry. This is heavy.
Yes,
right?
it is.
And I understand. The only thing is that the reason why we are having this is because it's part of history, and there may be some history in the U.S. too that happened and we don't know, or we know, and in other countries too. And learning about the history is important because then if you see that something happened and you disagree, we have the power to vote correctly for this not to happen again, right?
Yes.
So it's like that is a really important piece of information. It's like, why do we learn about history? Is that because history can repeat itself, and learning and understanding what happened and the results, or we can make better, good decisions because our power is the vote.
Yeah, and to know
Is
that,
it right?
yes,
I mean, that's...
yes, and to know that as individual citizens, common people, that we have the right to speak, to express our opinions without being subject to torture or to arbitrary imprisonment.
Without being afraid
Yes.
of expressing your beliefs, your thoughts. I mean, it's important.
If you do not agree with something, you have the right to go outside on the street and to yell, to say, I do not agree, and nobody can do nothing to you. You have that right, yes. Yes, it's a fundamental right, and I think that is important, and it's important to know that in Portugal, that's something very recent. Only 15 years ago, the Portuguese people acquired that right. So you can compare it with American history, you can see only 51 years ago. And you still have nowadays countries in which people do not have that right. Other people that were involved also in political activities. And you can see there, Pavel, it was the nickname of Francisco Paulo de Oliveira Jr. He was very well known, so people use a nickname to not be identified. Sometimes they use it, yes. He was a communist, member of the communist police.
That's one of the things like information. So that feels like an alarm. Like every time you would.
Oh, that's
That might be just maybe just
well, I mean, that would make sense.
yeah.
And you can see an example of cells, because structure of cells, how people were here in the cells. This is space they have.
I saw that.
For you to have an idea, in Robert Island, Nelson Mandela had more space than this. And this Robert Island
Looks like a dorm room.
part of this exhibition is about the resistance to Portuguese colonization in Africa, which I told you that was connected to the end of the Estado Novo dictatorship in Portugal. And these are images of 1974 when the dictatorship ended. Okay? So this is in front of the headquarters of the police, where the Marcelo Caetano, the prime minister, the successor of Salazar, was. And the population was in front of the building, and they did not allow him to leave. And these are the militaries that made the revolution in Portugal. And here, you can see here, it was known as the revolution of cravos. They call it the flower, cravos.
Cravo. It says, I'm sorry,
The flowers.
you know this kind of flower that looks like paper,
In French,
It looks like carnation.
carnation.
Carnation, yes.
Is that's the one that's spray painted like on graffiti?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
that's
what
carnation,
is because during the revolution, a female that used to sell the carnations, she offered the carnations to the militaries, and you will find militaries with the carnation in their armies. So that is the reason why it became the symbol of the Portuguese
She
revolution.
gave them to who?
To militaries. She gave the flowers to the militaries. She died, last year, I think. She was still alive. She was in her 90s. She was still alive, and she was a single mother, which is something that was very difficult back then in Portugal. A woman alone to raise their children, and she used to sell flowers on the streets. And she was a poor woman because it was not something that she earned a lot of money. But even so, in that day, when she heard that the regime ended, she was a simple woman. She did not have a lot of knowledge, but she knew that it was something very important, and her contribution was to give flowers, and she became, her gesture became one of the symbols of the Portuguese revolution. Was a simple woman that made something that even nowadays everybody recognizes. And every year on the 25th April, when we make a celebration, you find people with the red carnation. Yes, on the streets, yes.
Graffiti flower.
So you can see the image of pictures of the political prisoners. And here you can information of some of them.
And the person who is studying that one.
This is, sorry, Amado Vitorino. He was a shoemaker. Yes. A shoemaker that was imprisoned several times. In Angola, and then it lasted until 1974. And you can see, for instance, publications of some of the liberation movements, like for instance, MPLA or Frelimo. Okay? Many of the leaders of the liberation movement studied in Portugal, like for instance, Mário Pinto Andrade, that is very well known. Unfortunately, he has passed away. Here, Marcelino dos Santos also studied here in Portugal. Agostinho Neto, he was a doctor studying in Portugal. Or, for instance, Amílcar Cabral, they studied here in Portugal. And you can see Marcelino dos Santos, for instance, with Nelson Mandela. Yes.
And how do you see was there a difficult time for the people from the colonies to come and study? There was a sense of racism, or no? How I mean, for you to say that those people were able to go to college, how, and it was a tough, how was this?
There were a very small number of people that were able to come to study, because in the colony there was no university. For instance, in Nigeria, Senegal, the France or United Kingdom created universities in the beginning of 19th century. In the Portuguese colony, no. In the Portuguese colony, it was only in the 70s that in Angola and Mozambique they create something that would evolve after independence to universities. But there were no universities in those territories, so people used to come here to Portugal, to the metropole, to study. But they were half a dozen of people, most of them.
And that's because how many could afford?
Yes, could afford, and how many in Angola and Mozambique could study. Because most of the, for instance, elementary school, the primary school, was in the hand of the Catholic or Protestant missions.
Missionaries.
So, in the hands of missions, not in the hand of state. Why? Because states did not invest. Portuguese state did not invest in education in the colonies. So, only a few people were able to go to high school, to graduate, and then to have enough income, for instance, or scholarships to come to here to study. They are half a dozen.
Yes.
English. You can see they are prisoners, and yes, there is an idea that Portuguese colonialism was much better than, for instance, the British or the Belgian colonialism, because Portuguese were not as violent as, for instance, the Belgians or the British, but that's not true. Believe me, Portuguese colonialism was very, very violent. Very, very violent. Vision. And here are pictures of drawings that people made on the streets in Lisbon after the 25th of April of 1974, after the revolution. After the revolution, people that were repressed for almost 50 years had liberty, so they used this liberty to do public art. Have here many pictures of what people made in the streets, in the walls, in the streets of Lisbon. For instance, our history is the struggle of the people. And you can see many images connected to communism. Yes, incarnation. It was a period of huge popular participation in the public life. when Portugal held the first elections here in 1975, the participation was huge. Huge participation in the first elections in Portugal.
How is it now?
Nowadays, the turnout is more or less 50%. So people almost does not go to vote. We had elections in May. Our last elections in May. I think the turnout I think was 52% or something like that. There is a huge debate if the vote should be mandatory. For instance, there are countries like Brazil in which it's mandatory to vote. If you don't go to vote, for instance, you cannot renew your driver license and so on. So it's democracy is mandatory. There is a huge debate here in Portugal if we should do the same or not, because people really does not go to vote.
What is the argument against not
Against
making it mandatory?
is that people should have freedom not to go, and sometimes when you don't go to vote, that's also a statement. You are saying, look, I don't see any party in which I can vote.